Well, I'm delighted to say that for another podcast this week, we're going to be looking at a slightly different subject in the church. We're going to be looking at recent events that we've seen. And with me on the Godcast this week are three Church of England priests. And rather than me introduce them, I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves so we get the titles and their locations correctly. So, Father Luke, let's start with you. Welcome to the Godcast.
Thank you, Father Alex. Nice to be back here. I'm reminded of the words of a friend of mine in the priesthood who said that priests are a bit like manure, that when you spread them abroad, they can be useful, but when you heap them up together, they create a stink. So I'm hoping we can create a good stink this morning. I'm a part-time priest in charge of a parish in Luton. My parish is predominantly Muslim of Kashmiri and Bengali heritage, which will be relevant to what we're talking about today. And I'm also a part-time theologian, looking at some issues around social class, politics, liberation, those kinds of things, and the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. Oh, it's lovely to be here with you this morning.
Thank you, Luke. Likewise, and Chantal, Reverend Chantal, lovely to welcome you to first time guest, but we know each other quite a bit, don't we? So
Yeah.
please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Alex. So I'm Reverend Chantal Noppen. I'm based in the northeast, on the coast in a pit village called Horden. Still called a pit village because it's very much still part of who we understand ourselves to be. I was in parish ministry in Sunderland and Byker, Newcastle, but I am now the part-time national coordinator of Inclusive Church. That is my job. That's my day job. I was fascinated by the idea of part-time theologians. I think kind of priests are full-time theologians in many ways. So that's my job, but I hold PTO for the Diocese of Durham. So support in lots of parishes around the area where when they don't have their own clergy or the clergy are off and that kind of thing. So do lots of things, and I know Alex and Brenda actually through General Synod. So we create a stink there a little bit as well. It's great to be here though.
And last but no means least, Reverend Brenda, welcome to the Godcast.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for inviting me for the first time I've done this, so it's a bit nerve-wracking, but there we go. I'm Brenda Wallace. I'm allegedly a retired priest. Well, I'm definitely a priest and who's allegedly retired. I serve part-time still in three villages in rural Essex, so very different, not exactly a multicultural area, but it is this county, the birthplace of Nigel Farage, whose constituency is half an hour away from here. So it is an area where there are quite strong feelings about some of the social issues. And my local villages are splattered with St George's flag and Union flags, which is quite disconcerting. So I think, yes, these are issues that it's right for the church to be concerned about. And I'm glad to be joining you for this conversation this morning.
Great. Well, you're very welcome, Brenda. It's lovely to have you as a guest. I'm really keen for this discussion to be kind of as broad as possible. I don't want people who watch it just think, "Oh, this is a load of lefties kind of slagging off the right." I want it to be kind of, because I think one of the things, and Chantal, you'll definitely recognise this as inclusive church, is that being an inclusive priest is to welcome everybody to the table, whether you're far right, far left, or whatever. But so so I hope people pick up that we're not just here to kind of. I see Father Luke's got his Unite flag in the background. Hopefully the discussion will be enriching. But let's start by looking at or getting some individual kind of feeling and sentiment from what's been happening in recent weeks and months. Father Luke, starting with you, in Burnley, we are awash with Union Jacks. You think it was the coronation again, although there was no flags out when it was the coronation. So I find that a slight irony. But what's the landscape like where you are in Luton?
I think it's important to know a bit of the history of our town in the sense that Luton's been a very multicultural, multi-ethnic and multi-religious town for a long time. Successive waves of immigration, often from particular places. So my ancestors came here to dig up the roads from Ireland, and we've had successive waves of immigration since. And of course, Luton is sadly well known for being the birthplace of the EDL. It's where Stephen Yaxley Lennon, or Tommy Robinson, as he's often known, grew up and started the EDL. It's also where Andrew Tate grew up. So we feel these issues run straight through like fault lines through our town here in Luton. I've not seen a lot of flags up in Luton itself. There have been a few. Last year, there were some St George's flags painted on a roundabout and on the sign outside our local mosque in our parish, which obviously caused a lot of distress. The fact that their property was defaced as part of that. And of course, we've seen elsewhere in the country Islamophobic graffiti actually daubed on the walls of a mosque itself. So I feel the tension very profoundly here. And of course, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. There are growing tensions where we are here in response to what's been going on across the country. And it's very concerning and troubling. What we do have here in Luton is a really strong council of faiths and quite a lot of strong collaborative work between people of different faiths and ethnicities. So we were round a table with each other last week discussing how we would respond as a council of faiths to this. I have to say, I've been really disappointed by the way that a lot of church leaders and Christians have responded to all of this, both locally and nationally. I think there have been attempts to legitimise some of what's been going on. People have used language like the indigenous white community in Luton. My response to that is, which indigenous white community are we talking about? The Picts, the Celts, the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons, the Irish, the Nordic invaders? It's quite staggering how badly we often do in times like this as the church. It's quite staggering that people that clearly don't have enough of a grasp on the situation, maybe that's just being generous, I don't know, speak out and then cause further divides, cause further upset to my dear friends in the Muslim community here who are already feeling afraid to travel across the country to visit family, feeling afraid walking home at night. So we're feeling it, and we're feeling it here too. We've experienced intolerance towards us as a Christian community in our neighbourhood. So the tensions are running quite high, I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Reverend Chantal, what's your kind of take on things, and how are things where you are in your area of the northeast?
So, my village is would traditionally be a very red voting area, and there is a strong percentage now who support reform in my patch. And so I've thought about this quite a lot from that kind of angle. And doing funeral visits is one of the things that priests always end up talking about, funeral ministry, but there's so many good reasons for it. But it's one of the opportunities we get to go into people's homes, to meet them, hear their stories, understand them, where they come from, who they are, how they are, and why they are. And the pictures I've built up, I've only lived in this village for just over a year, a bit over a year. But through the funeral ministering, talking to families, it doesn't take long to hear and realize that there is still very deep pain and anger and fury, I guess, about the pits being shut, and the kind of generations that we've had of being overlooked, being told how things are going to be, being promised something that's going to make something better, but then it doesn't. Like there are streets and streets that have been cleared with the promise it's going to then be improved, but then actually you just got half the property standing empty and half of them not. And there's a lot of anger. And I think it's interesting what Luke's saying about legitimizing that. And because I would definitely err on the side of, sometimes I would say, yeah, it's legitimate anger, because it is, because they have been treated badly, they have been overlooked, they have every right to be angry. But I think that where the anger is then directed is the problem, and that the church has been far too complicit, I think, in allowing that anger to be directed at people who are not the problem, who are being scapegoated. And that kind of, we all have this desire to not be the odd one out and to fit in, some less than others, perhaps, but it's uncomfortable when you feel that you don't fit. And when you've got anger that's all in you, you want to put it somewhere because it's hard, it weighs you down. And if you're told that this is the point, this is the person you can blame, you jump on that because you need that outlet. And I think one of the things that is noticeable in my village is that we are much more multicultural looking and diverse looking than where I was in Sunderland. And when you can see the visible differences, it's easy to stoke up hatred. And the people who stir the hatred are often not living here, not from here. And yeah, I have so many thoughts, but I think that my biggest one is I would love us to rediscover mercy, what it means to be merciful, how that ties in with justice. And I think the bishops in the Lords do some really good speaking into these issues that are actually at the root of why people are angry, why they're feeling afraid, why they think they're losing stuff.
Yeah, I think well, I think we all think about this a lot, and it probably all troubles us quite a bit at the moment, you know. But you know, my context in Burnley, urban estate, flags absolutely everywhere. You know, I'm not going to say what Luke says. You know, that I'm going to legitimize why or what people are doing, but as a vicar with a cure of souls for all these people, I have to somehow kind of give it some sort of context. And I do think there is, like you said there, you know, things have gone, you know, and I think there's for older people, it might be kind of a sense of loss of heritage. But for younger people, it might be just for younger mums and dads, maybe in their 30s and 40s, it's like, where's my youth club gone? You know? So I think there is a lot of social injustice in the root cause of some of these issues. And I think the church has been complicit in not standing up and speaking for the working classes as government has. And so I think it's a very deep issue. Brenda, I think it's really important to not dismiss rural communities, you know, because I think you know, I grew up in a rural village, and like Chantal was saying, you know, reform is lapping it up in these places. What's your take?
I think one of the challenges we have in rural areas is that we're not multicultural. So people are talking out of ignorance. You know, their neighbours are white, middle class people, not all middle class, but you know, people don't have experience of GMH people as neighbours, friends, people they socialise with. So that's part of the challenge is that they can other immigrants, GMH people, because they're not part of their daily lives. So I wonder if that sort of impacts on people's perceptions. And we have a breadth of views in our village congregations. We don't have, I think we have one GMH family who regularly attend in two of our three churches. So there's, you know, but that's the only contact people have. So there's a lot of, you know, people don't know the people that they're talking about, so it's easy to dismiss them as aliens. I think our strength is that our bishop, the Bishop of Chelmsford, Bishop Dooley, is herself a refugee, and she makes a great point of making that obvious. She's Iranian born and fled to England when her brother was killed when she was 12, and thought she would go back after a couple of years and never has. And so she's a great example for us that she can speak out from her own experience and does publicly, both within the church and in the wider world. But yes, you're right. We also have to bear in mind, I have people in my congregation who I know vote for reform because they tell me so. And I have to respect that they're people who believe that's compatible with their Christian faith, and that's okay. But also, I'm not afraid to challenge it. And I've had somebody walk out of the sermon because he thought I was being too political. And that's fine in a way, because at least he was listening and thinking about it. Now he doesn't walk out, but he'll challenge me over coffee and we can have a dialogue.
Yeah.
We're not going to agree, but I think you know, it's a way of showing and saying that yes, these are different views. How do we make this compatible with
Yeah.
what we see of Christ in the Gospels?
Yeah. Father Luke, what should our response be to people such as Tommy Robinson and Katie Hopkins, who are almost trying to pilfer Christianity away from the institution? I mean, it's kind of, it seems to be one of their key strap lines. This is a Christian country. Well, I made a social media point recently where I said I'm glad it is, because if it wasn't, my church would be on its arse, because it's full of multicultural people from America, Hong Kong, Nigeria, Latvia, Poland. What should our response be to the leaders of the right wing idea that this is a Christian country?
I mean, any of us who have a cursory look at history will know this is not a new strategy being used by people on the right-hand side of the aisle in politics. Um, to give an illustration, Tommy Robinson created a huge amount of upset, which resulted in threats and all sorts when a United Reformed Church building in Luton was being sold to a Muslim organisation. He suggested that it was being turned into a mosque. I'm not sure that's actually quite correct, but it created huge tensions and a real kind of pile-on and a lot of hatred towards the Muslim community in Luton, because it followed this rhetoric of we're being taken over, we're losing our Christian heritage, we're losing this church building, and it's being turned into a mosque. Now, the reality was that church building hadn't been used in years because nobody went. So my question to all of those that are wanting to make a big deal of our this being a Christian nation and standing for Christian principles. Well, first and foremost, I'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday morning then. I'll look forward to you volunteering to mow the churchyard so that I don't have to do it. Where are all these people? And I have to say, I found it fascinating that in a recent interview, Tommy, now who is claiming to be a Christian, quoted the Quiet Revival report, which is suggesting that some huge percentage of young people are now apparently attending church every week. Where these young people are, I don't know, because they're not attending any of the churches that I've seen, and there's some major questions over how that research was done. So I think that it's not difficult to start picking holes in this whole argument about our Christian heritage. So that's the one hand. Second hand, I'd say, what Christian heritage are we talking about? Are we talking about the Christian heritage that justified the transatlantic slave trade? Are we talking about the Christian heritage that justified settler colonialism, which actually, by the way, is probably the reason why we have such a multicultural society now, whether you like that or not? Are we talking about the Christian heritage which has promoted violence against LGBTQ people? Which Christian heritage is it we're talking about? Are we talking about the Christian heritage based on the Hebrew prophets that promotes the welcome of the stranger, that says God's on the side of the poor and the alien? There isn't a Christian heritage. There's no such thing as a Christian heritage. There are multiple Christian heritages. So we want to get a bit more specific about which Christian heritage it is that we're talking about here, right? As for whether we're a Christian nation or not, I mean, in name we have been for some time, but a lot of really dreadful stuff was perpetrated under that name. So I really don't believe that there are honest motives behind this claim for Christianity. If we're a Christian nation, surely we should be holding all our wealth in common and telling all the rich people to give up all of their money and give it to the poor. That's Christian teaching, right? It's in my Bible. I don't know about yours.
And that's the key, isn't it? Because like people say Christian country and it's what Christian country, what is it do you mean? And which bits of the Bible? Because it's only bits. And the Bible has everything, it covers everything. And that kind of, I love that kind of, which Bible are you using? Oh, this heavily redacted version where you're just ignoring things like the Beatitudes and, Jesus, everything, who Jesus was, how Jesus was. And I thought that being Christian was meant to be about emulating Christ. and trying to follow the example that we're shown in Jesus. And that, exactly as you say, the clothing the naked, binding up the broken hearts, looking for the vulnerable, supporting them, the widows, the orphans, all of those given a place at the table. And I was reflecting on this a bit last night, and around the amount of healing that Jesus brings and how those healings, what they're about. And there's always consent. There's always him meeting them in their need. But then it's not just the person, it's the community. It's about bringing them back into community and being reintegrated, and welcomed, and calling out that that has not happened. And I think, what do we mean by Christian country? Because churches don't always get it right. So it's not necessarily, well, if you don't go to church, you can't be a Christian. But there is something in that being in a community of believers is how you keep your belief real. It's how you're held accountable. And if you don't go to church and don't hear those scriptures about blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, feed them, clothe them, help them, support them, what are you looking at? What are you listening to? And if you can't be recognized by your actions because they're not speaking of love and justice and mercy and grace, what is this Christianity that you're referring to? And I always think about, I used to play rugby when I was at university, not very well, admittedly, but that whole thing, that use it or lose it, that kind of, if you're not doing what you need to do, pass the ball on so someone else can. And I think we see a lot of that with churches. No one wants to be the priest who has to shut a church.
No,
but
I agree.
It's not that simple.
I think, Brenda, just before I come to you, I just wanted to make this point, about this kind of, I think, personally, I think the church sometimes gets entwined in kind of corporate and secular stuff. We've had recent discussions in our church about visions. We need to create a vision, and I just think, and I often say, well, let's just stick up the Beatitudes. Stick the there's the vision. Next, but anyway, Brenda, if Tommy Robinson walked into your church, would you welcome him?
Yes, of course. I mean, with difficulty, I have to be honest, but yes, because if he walked into our church, if he started trying to claim this sort of false equity between white British, fake Britishness and Christianity, then yes, I'd want to challenge it. I'd want to remind him that the cradle of our faith is in the Middle East. Jesus was Arab by birth and by nationality, and it's only gradually that Christianity has spread and become a westernized thing. Christianity is still strong in a lot of non-Western, non-white countries, in fact, stronger than it is here. And so it's a false equation. I'd perhaps want to remind him that St. George, if St. George existed, was a Turkish mercenary and never stepped foot on our island. So why are we proclaiming the St. George flag, the Crusader flag, and as an exemplar of Christianity? There's this false dichotomy that to be Christian is to be white and therefore to reject other people. I mean, Benedict said that in welcoming the stranger, you're welcoming Christ, and therefore we should always welcome the stranger. So, but yes, I would welcome him. I'd want to try and have a dialogue. I think the challenge is that people are not open to dialogue. People that have these strong views don't want challenging. They don't want dialogue. And therefore you're banging your head against a brick wall a lot of the time. It's like people that have strong views on any issues within the church. As soon as you try and counter those and enter into any sort of debate or discussion, or then you just get the same stuff repeated. It's not. There's just not the openness, I think, to a change of view.
Luke, one of my biggest frustrations, I think, about our church hierarchy is they're not in the public arena. They'll write a letter to the Church Times, but contrary to popular belief, the Church Times is not as widely read as other publications. And I wonder what you feel the response should be from our bishops, particularly in these matters.
I mean, I have to admit, even when they are in the public conversation, I feel like I prefer they weren't sometimes. Um, but then, it's easy to certainly those of us on the left and with union history might find it easier to take pot shots at the hierarchy. But on a local level, our local bishop spoke beautifully and addressed these topics in an intelligent and in a gracious way at our Council of Faiths last week, and actually spent most of his time just listening to what other people had to say. So, there are some good ones out there. But I think what we need to do is get to the heart of the matter on this stuff. And so when I say I don't believe in legitimizing hate, I do believe that there are hugely legitimate concerns in working class communities about what's happening in our economics, what's happening to the kind of institutions and community assets that help working class and other communities to thrive. I think we need to be talking about that definitely. And I think actually one of the things I find difficult as a retired bricklayer in the Church of England is there's a kind of Oxford and Cambridge performance of decency and sorry, that's my security manager letting me know someone's coming to the door. There's this kind of performance of politeness. Sometimes we need to just call things what they are.
I'm smiling at that because I'm neurodivergent. I'm autistic and have ADHD, and one of the characteristics of those things is often that kind of being blunt, being direct, and saying what we see, meaning what we say, and using words just openly and pretty honestly, and with no like complex agendas behind and no game playing. And yes, that is not a comfortable fit being like that in the Church of England, which is dominated by this middle class mentality of stiff upper lip, no real emotions, and everything being a game and a facade that has to be held. Whereas, so when I finished training, I was sent for my curacy to Biker. Before I trained, I didn't really understand that there's these different factions of ministry, but they pulled a blinder sending me to Biker because estates ministry was the home I didn't know I needed. And that kind of straight talking, real stuff that you get from working class and deprived communities where if something's wrong, they'll tell you. And if they're annoyed at you, they'll tell you. And someone like me, who's half Dutch and autistic, that's grand. We know where we're at. If we disagree, we'll have it out. But there isn't the game playing, there isn't the bitchiness and the going behind someone's back. There isn't the two-facedness. You know. And then you're like, all right. And I love that. And I wish the world was more like that and less kind of, oh well, to make it, you have to be able to fake it, and faking it has to look like this. One of the things that I didn't get called to speak in the working class debate in February, but one of the things I wanted to say is we have this inbuilt thing in the Church of England that proper coffee is good coffee, is filter coffee. That stuff you put in a coffee pot with a cafetiere and stuff, or a filter. Whereas instant coffee is rubbish. And proper Christians, good churches have good coffee. And it's like, but if you work in estates and deprived communities, instant coffee is really popular. Doesn't make these people lesser. It's a different drink. That's fine. Why do we assume that one is good and one is bad? Like it's a false equivalence. And the attitude towards coffee, I think, is really, really telling of who we are and what we think matters and where we put our value. So
I think that makes me a class traitor. I'm a bit of a coffee snob, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Well,
Ditto. I'm afraid I am too, but there you go.
we drifted into the working class
I'm
debate.
irredeemably
Go on,
I'm
Brenda.
irredeemably middle class. I'm afraid it's what I was brought up in. But I just want to sort of question this thing about, oh, it's, the bishops haven't spoken out. Well, I mean, firstly, our bishop, and I'll wave the flag for her again, has. But also, I'm not sure people take that much notice of bishops, to be honest, at a local level. You know, the bishop can speak out, they can put something on the Dawson website. Who's listening to that? What people are listening to is people like us locally in our churches. What we say in our churches can have far more impact in the way we act, not just what we say, but the fact that we carry that out in the way we act and the way we relate to people will have far more impact than some pronouncement from an archbishop. I mean, there was something in the news that said, "Oh well, the Church of England is in a sort of vacuum because we haven't got an Archbishop of Canterbury." Well, to be honest, I don't think that makes a lot of difference. We've got an Archbishop of York if we need it, but you know, it's us as working parish priests and you know the people in our that can have the most impact on people and can at least make them stop and think, even if we can't change their or broaden their minds, we can at least challenge them. So I think, you know, it's down to us really
I
at
think you're right,
grassroots level.
Brenda. I think I did a radio thing a few days ago, and I made that point. You know, there is a parallel universe. There's the hierarchy of the church, and there's the on the ground boots on the terraces kind of approach as well. As time's flying by, so we're going to have to bring this to a close. But Father Luke, what would your kind of prayer and your kind of final reflection be on this subject as we drift into the autumn months?
Solidarity. That's what we need. In the church across our nation, across the world at the moment is my prayer is that God's Spirit helps us recognize one another's humanity in all of its lived reality. That kind of deep solidarity where we really care for those who are different to us when they've nothing to offer us. There's so much dehumanizing of people, so much treating people like objects, treading all over them, talking about them like they're not there. I think what we really need is to re-encounter our neighbours. You know, and that's a struggle in my parish. You know, my lad's the only Christian in his school, and he gets the raw end of that sometimes. You know, that goes for everybody. Is that we need to work out how to build solidarity. And actually, if you look at most of the faith traditions of the world, they speak about that kindness towards neighbour, the golden rule, all of that stuff. I think more of that, please God.
Mm. And Reverend Chantal, maybe a word of encouragement to Christians who might be listening or watching this, how they might respond.
Oh, I wasn't expecting to change the question on me.
Sorry. Well,
That's all right. I think hope and to understand that it's not naive stupidity to believe things might get better and could be better, and to where we see hope and grace and examples of love and mercy to water that ground and to shine a light on it and bring it out into the light further and go, come on, let's see this. Because I think, as Brenda was saying, I would go further, in fact, and say that the people who come to church who believe in love and justice and mercy and dialogue and grace, they're going to have much more impact than I could ever have. It doesn't matter how long I've spent on a sermon, like, it's how I say hello to them at the door that really matters. And it's the witty aside that I just dropped in I hadn't meant to say that sits with them. And I lived with a nun back at uni for a while, and she used to say that for some people, you are the only Bible someone will ever read. And that means that how we live is what matters. And it's good to have our priests doing good jobs, yes, absolutely. But there are far more people who come to church, and there are far more Christians than there will ever be priests. I'm not saying that priests aren't Christian, just to be clear, but that helping people see and believe that they matter, that their way of living out their faith matters, that the way they love their neighbours matters. And that's how you change the world. It's how you treat people that you meet day to day and love them that will change the world.
I think that's an important thing to say. You know, quite often in our church, once people have received communion, they get the coats on and they they go and start preparing the tea and biscuits. When actually, there's a really fundamental part of the Mass, which is the very end bit, isn't it, where we say, go in peace to love and to serve the Lord. And I try and say that um, with such a warmth and feeling, because that's what I want them to do. I want them to go and love and serve, serve Jesus outside of the walls of the church. Brenda, the final word to you. You've had an opportunity
Well,
to consider both
I,
comments.
yeah, I just want to endorse, totally agree with what Chantal says. It's not just clergy, it's everybody in the church. And I think we need to mirror that Christian message that of God's love. That, I mean, it's a cliche, but God does love everyone. God loves people, whatever their race, whatever their color, whatever their culture. God loves the Tommy Robinsons of this world. We have to accept that, and we have to show that in the way that we live as Christians. At the church door, out and about in our communities, we have to demonstrate that and not just talk about it. And just encourage other people to be respectful. That in welcoming this, I go back to Benedict, in welcoming the stranger, we are welcoming Christ.
Wonderful, a great way to end the podcast. Thank you all so much for coming on. I hope people who've watched or listened to this have found it interesting. If you have, then please share it or subscribe to the YouTube channel. But for now, guys, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.